All right, guys, for the next part of our evening, I want to start it off with another survey of the audience. Does anyone here currently or formerly work for Google? Anybody? Not one person?
Did you say formerly?
Or formerly, yeah. One person, okay. Does anyone here use Google for anything? That's better. All right. Our speaker this evening has worked for Google for 8 years and then left to become the CEO of ClusterPoint. Please welcome Sigmar Struszewski.
Okay, hi everyone. So coincidentally with preparing to this talk, it was the weekend before, I actually came across an article which made an interesting statement. The article was written by the philosopher, and apparently nowadays philosophers are interested in neuroscience, so as computer scientists. And so at some point the philosopher made a reference to a clinical study which concluded that if human brain gets damaged in one of its parts, then other parts which are still healthy take over the function. At that point he made an interesting statement, which was at least very interesting to me. He said, computers cannot do this. And well, that made me think, have you ever wondered why, for example, email that you put up in the cloud never gets lost? I mean, for example, disk spindles, they die more often than people getting cracks in their heads. But nevertheless, computers manage to live through that. And this made me kind of think about that the perception of what the computer is might be different. So most of the people actually, by computer, mean the physical device is there standing on the desk or under the desk. While for me, as well as probably many of us in software engineering and computer science, we start to perceive a computer or computers as a massive cluster of servers which actually work in a coordinated way and can take over computation or data from each other. So I think that this is basically a transformation of the perception of computing that happened over recent years. And if you look where most of the computers or machines have aggregated themselves, then cloud computing is one of the places. What economic sense cloud computing makes? Let's contrast two extremes. On one side, imagine every organization in the world running their own computing infrastructure. This means they need to have data center staff, they need to have some sort of fulfillment process, they need to take care of repairs, pretty much do everything it needs to be done to make systems run 24/7. On the other hand, in the ideal world of cloud computing, all the servers have been aggregated in a few, let's say, tens or hundreds locations around the world, and presumably cloud computing vendors get better at getting the right parts, fulfillment process, energy efficiency, everything. So arguably there is a potential to reduce operational overheads, and all in all it makes economic sense. However, you could ask, for me as a software engineer, what difference does it make? What's in it? Okay, there are trade-offs, or there are differences in the cost versus how easy it is to get resources, or how easy it is to debug problems, but I can run my code in the data center in the basement or in the cloud does it change anything about how I write the software, or is anything possible that wasn't possible before? So this is why I asked myself a fundamental question of, given all the state of technology we have today, and the principles of distributed software design, can we build a cloud computing platform for which the benefit in terms of speed and performance for every user is greater than the share they have contributed in terms of funding the cumulative footprint? And one of the ideas is, if we pull together the hardware requirements from, let's say, hundreds or thousands of organizations, how about everybody enjoys the much wider parallelism? Okay, so that sounds like let me first illustrate what I meant by that. So if you imagine a setup where each of the organizations have disjoint hardware, either it is owned or rented, that doesn't really matter, but as long as there is a fixed provision capacity with the time axis running downwards in this diagram, each of these colored boxes represents some sort of computational task. Either it's answering a live user request, or it is some number crunching task, doesn't matter. The important thing is each of these requests take particular time span on a particular hardware that the organization has. Now, contrast that with a second case where we actually manage to subsume all of computational resources in a single cluster. There is a potential for each of these computational tasks to run much faster because of the wider parallelism. However, the total amount of work done is exactly the same, which means that there is no additional funding required. It's just that benefit that every user gets. Okay, well, that sounds like a good idea, so let's build such a computational platform where users enjoy these benefits of the parallelism. But there are some challenges underway. So, for example, let's say you're using such a computational platform, you get your data in, you become comfortable with the performance characteristics of your workloads. Just like the cat sitting on the trampoline, you might not realize that the next moment there will be somebody much bigger coming around, and suddenly your assumptions of performance characteristics become imprecise. So this is known as noisy neighbor problem in the public clouds. Well, they have been getting better at this over time, but it is particularly challenging if you want to build a real multi-tenant system. So for the rest of the talk, I will actually go through a couple of key principles or findings that we at ClusterPoint had to put in practice to make sure that the multi-tenant database actually works for its users, and that we can build a system where no longer you have a fixed capacity with your hardware it's running on, that you can use a bigger share. And I will talk about performance guarantees, failure tolerance, and consistency as important points there. So the first one is performance guarantees, or how do we make sure that if there are many users sharing the same hardware, how can we make sure that they get predictable performance at the same time as they have high orders of parallelism in the system. And also, I will try to illustrate why it would be much more challenging to build such a system as a generic computational platform that allows you to do any kind of computation on any kind of or any kind of processing, and how database stack or database as a service actually enables doing this. So let's remember what we are trying to do. So a simple math says that if we have put together lots of servers and we want each of the users to run with a very high order of parallelism, then a single machine actually has to handle workload from very many users in order of hundreds or thousands. And then we get into this single machine. A particular machine or server has some resources it needs to manage, like CPU, RAM, flash, spinning disks. And an interesting observation is that given our requirement of having a lot of different workloads running on that machine, the level of parallelism in these devices is actually smaller than the number of workloads we want to run. So as we have tens of CPU cores on the machines, as many spindles as we have, then basically if we were to run a generic computational platform and we would put like, let's say 100 application stacks on the machine, they would have to go to operating system, and the operating system would have to figure out how to share the resources. By the way, by application stacks, what I mean here is application from the operating system's perspective, so it could as well be a database stack for each of the users, no matter what database they are running. So an obvious problem there is that it's not necessarily that the operating system will do the right thing in terms of allocating the resources. For example, with CPUs, if it figures out there's more threads than basically CPU cores, it will allocate time proportionally on the time quantum of 100 to 150 milliseconds between the threads that need to run. And not that the operating system is stupid in the way how it does it, it's just that it doesn't have intrinsic knowledge about the requests that each stack tries to process. There is much, if you have knowledge about what requests you are processing, what are the relative priorities, what are the fan-out factors, and thus impact on the latency, and can we actually bounce back traffic and send it somewhere else that the operating system doesn't know. All this knowledge would be very useful, but it's not the one that the operating system has, so it cannot make these decisions. That's why a common way to approach the computational platform or running computation on the cloud is through containerization or isolation. So basically we are creating the containers where we are saying these CPU cores go to application stack 1, other CPU cores go to application stack 2, and so on and so forth. We might virtualize disks and so on and so forth. The result of this is, with this method, you can actually have only amount of the software stacks on the machine which are smaller than the level of parallelism in the underlying resources. Basically, what containerization gives you is isolation, but it doesn't necessarily allow you to share the resources and prioritize them on the low granularity of the time scale. That's why what we are actually proposing is manage these resources on the application stack. If you notice that no longer we want to build a generic cloud computing platform that can do whatever computational task and run whatever binaries, and Instead, we will focus only on data management, because basically data management is also a part which nowadays takes a lot of resources. Then what we can do, we can actually on each machine deploy the same application stack. In this case, by application, application again is from operating systems perspective, so that's actually the database binary. And the database binary can actually manage access to these critical resources through the application side queues. What it gives us is that now we have single stack running on the machine, and we can also notice that for all of the requests or different classes of the requests, they go through the same request state, basically, and different states in the request processing have to access different resources. So what happens there is that we create workers with the same level of parallelism as the underlying resources. For example, for each CPU core there is a worker, the same for disks, and each of them manages a queue of requests where request corresponds to the user request. What this gives us is actually a lot of priority in how we can handle the queue. We can reorder requests in the queue based on priority. We can actually give shorter requests priority over longer or more intense requests, and thus optimizing or having the proportional penalty, because you don't want to slow a short-lived request or a fast one because there is a request in the system that is actually computationally intense, and give this proportional penalty for the short-lived requests. The other thing is also, if you are looking at distributed design, then the database knows that if the request queue is full, it can actually, and there is another replica of the same shard, it can send or bounce off the requests and can send them somewhere else. So what this gives us, we actually can let go from application level prioritization and isolation to request level prioritization in our application stack. And the real difference is that if we had application level isolation, there wouldn't be a different way how to handle this than have each of the resources in the system, like CPU cores, allocated to a particular user or particular software stack. While if you have request level isolation and prioritization, then you can mix much more freely, and this is how you get an orders of magnitude of hundreds or thousands of requests, hundreds and thousands users processed on a particular machine easily. So basically, using this approach, we can get to a result that we have built a distributed database service where many users put on their databases, and the database service distributes them among many servers and handles that transparently. So basically, another advantage of this is we get from the model of isolation where each of the users in this cloud computing platform would get the box of the size that they estimated before, and the system would actually isolate and never want them to get out of that box, or never allow to get out of that box. And we changed that to a system where we actually run an allocation process. So all we need to do is estimate the demand, allocate work to resources, and prioritize accordingly to allocation, and iterate by re-estimating the demand. What it gives actually us, or the users, is that they no longer need to run the provisioning process in which they need to estimate the resources necessary for the system. So have a particular data set and you have workload, you need to run some sort of benchmarks and measure how many servers you need. You need to decide how many servers of particular size, what is the trade-off between number of servers and cores per servers and all of these questions. While if you switch to a shared environment where you actually run all of these traffic classes and workloads on a common cluster, instead of provisioning each of the streams, you can actually, with statistical methods, estimate how much resources you need. So looking at this three-step process of allocation, then basically what you need to do in the first step is you need to estimate the overall demand of computational resources, and there's really the two levels at which it is done. First of them is long-term predictive models, which is answering the question on the time frame of which you can actually order machines and get your machine into the cluster. You need to answer the question, how much resources within that time frame do I need in aggregate for your cloud database footprint? And while the short-term question is, once I have the machines and I cannot actually change the size of the footprint, how do I allocate data to particular machines and traffic to the and traffic as well? So long-term demand estimation is actually quite simple, because you just have to observe data, you can build a statistical model, and you can predict some upper bounds. And really, this is like low technology. You can do the way we do it. We basically divide the users in two classes: the users that have just registered and we don't know if they are going to use the system, versus the ones which are already using the system. And then from this fork, you actually follow the same approach, pretty much. For the users that have just signed up, we can estimate or define a probability of them starting to consume the resources. If they start to consume resources, there's certain distribution with some parameters about what actual resources they would use. And looking at the past data, you can infer the parameters of the model and basically then making this prediction based on those parameters, given how many registrations you see and the same paths you can also apply for the existing users. So that's long-term demand estimation. The short-term resource allocation is actually trickier, and there the method that works is actually simulation, because we have to simulate two effects. One of them is traffic, so workloads sometimes tend to be very unpredictable or spiky. So what we want to do is we come up with a prediction which is, given the observed traffic, we basically come up with the predicted average usage and the probability that this traffic class would require much more resources. And the other thing to simulate is single machine failures. And in light of these events, you can basically, you have to work on two different time scales. You have to place your data, because moving data around within the cluster takes a bit longer. And once you have placed your data, and you will be refining the placement, you can actually move the traffic around. So another advantage it actually gives us is that if we can come up with this prediction model where we predict average and we have some safety buffer, we again can see that if we construct the isolated environment with the real multi-tenant environment, is that we can combine these safety margins and actually get more effective. Because in isolated case, you would have to, if there is a particular number of, let's say, CPU cores which are pinned for a particular user, then what you need to do is you need to leave that safety margin for every single tenant in the system, while if you have joint footprint or setup where you are actually managing the resources within the user space queue, then you can, that simulation would come up with the more dense packing. So that's pretty much it on the performance guarantees. So let me switch to the next topic, my favorite one, which is failure tolerance. So the question here is, how do we guarantee the high availability of the system within the light of software and hardware failures? So to get into this, let's start by defining some terminology. So cluster point, same as many NoSQL databases, organize the data in self-contained documents. Then the whole document space is divided among many shards. So each shard contains a portion of the data. And then these shards get replicated for durability. So you have, let's say, 3 shards of the same data which are the same. Now, the shard is a logical unit of the data or part of the database. On the other hand, you have a machine, which is hardware, with storage media, where the data can be placed, and attached computation, which can perform computational tasks on that data. What we need is actually now database node or binary, which actually hosts the data on a given machine. Now, nodes in the system get some database shards assigned to them, and not only you can assign shards from one database, you can actually, one node can host shards from multiple databases. As we remember that we are trying to build a multi-tenant system, there would actually be very many shards from many databases running on a single machine. So now the question is, what happens if one of these machines die? Obviously, we get some of the data gets lost, but we can notice that there is a different replica of the same shard placed on a different machine. Again, an advantage of the multi-tenant system here is that if you have very many shards on a particular machine, then the traffic that now spills over from this machine to others gets distributed between many machines. So the incremental data that the other machines in the cluster gets because of the failure of this particular machine is really small. Okay, if the machine is gone forever, we actually need to replicate the missing replicas on other machines. So we do this by copying it in the empty spaces that are left in the cluster. There is also an alternative design where we keep, instead of keeping empty places in the cluster, we actually keep the entire machine. But this turns out to be suboptimal, because to recover all of these replicas, you actually have to copy in the entire machine. So compared to a previous case where you had to, where each machine takes over a small piece of the one which died, in the latter case, you have to image the entire machine, and that takes much longer. So that much about single machine failures. Now, returning to overall design, we also, apart from computational node, we also need a hub. Because we have split the data between many machines, we need something that represents the client as a single database. So we introduce a process called hub, which basically puts requests. When it gets a request from the client, it sends it down to multiple nodes then the data comes back, it unifies it and sends it back to the client. So I think that there are different approaches within the NoSQL or distributed database design. A lot of key value stores in particular skip this step of having a hub that actually represents to the client the database. Instead, it pushes the knowledge of the shards to the client library, so that the client can talk to a particular computational node directly. However, it is okay if all you are doing is key value type operations, like reads of single document by a key, because then it's fairly simple for the client to figure out which node it needs to talk to. While if you are doing something more sophisticated, then you actually need to, there's a lot of logic that works on top of intermediate results to combine them in the end result. That's why for a real database design, you actually need this process called hub in the middle. And the update pass pretty much looks like hub talking to an each node, where each node that has a replica of a particular shard, like if we are updating a particular document, creating a new one, then this document belongs to a particular shard, which means that hub needs to talk to all nodes that host the replicas of that particular shard. On the other hand, on a serving pass, if you are looking for a subset of the documents that match your query, those documents can be within any node. So hub actually needs to talk to all nodes hosting each shard, or at least one replica from each shard. And now, the very interesting question, or the big value proposition of distributed databases or NoSQL is that your code actually gets executed, or your request gets served by very many computational nodes, which is great because you can parallelize your computation. However, the question is, what if a particular query causes a crash in your software? The problem is then you crash all of the nodes, which means that your cluster is down. So again, to contrast the on-premise system, which is run by a single user, with the cloud database, this problem becomes much more pronounced because we are mixing a lot of different workloads. As well, usually on premises, software upgrades are done really, new traffic classes appear really, but there is a staging process. If you have a cloud database, then basically people can send you whatever requests at whatever time. So this is actually quite an unpleasant problem that needs some sort of solution. And there are two possible solutions. Yeah, so yeah, well, number one would be great, but you know, it was attempted and usually doesn't work. So instead of writing a code without any bugs, we can make the system resistant against such a failures, which is more complicated, but it's possible. So one of the techniques is, so instead of sending the request down to every computational node at the same time, you can actually pick one node, send the request there. Once you get the result, only then you send it down. On the other hand, if you don't get the result and you assume the worst, you can actually put that query currently in the bad query table moreover, hubs can share this bad query table immediately between themselves, so that the other hub doesn't send the same bad query again, which crashes the system, and the problem is kind of contained. There's more that is going on at the node level. So once the node crashes, there's actually a host process that gets the sick child signal, and it immediately restarts the node because now it's protected by the bad query table. However, the bad query table might have some innocent queries in it because there might be more queries in a flight at the time when it crashed. So the host process actually examines the core dump as well as in-flight query table, which is basically just the mapping from the thread IDs to the queries that were in flight. And by examining the core, it can find out which is the offending thread and figure out the precise query which caused the problem. So that query table gets updated. There's also a watchdog which calls the phone, and somebody comes and investigates the problem and presumably and sometimes ships the fix, but in the meantime the system is protected against the queries which caused it to fail. Yeah, question? Well, then it's broken. Well, actually, it was quite funny. I think it was some time ago. The hard part is also testing this whole stuff. And you might laugh, but we actually had to implement a command or function in our system which was called crash me. So don't try it out because it's disabled in production, but to test the whole system that it works, we had to implement the function which actually simulated the whole bus. And yeah, so to be honest, such basically failures or particular queries which cause the system to crash are relatively rare, but it's comparing, I think it can be compared to a safety belt in a car. You don't crash your car every day, but once you do, you want to be well prepared and have a process in place instead of panicking. So another thing where it has to be, where care has to be taken is upgrades. So when you roll out the new version of the software, that's when actually problems happen. That's why this reasonable process, you actually get quite rare crashes in production. So what can be done there is, instead of updating all of your computational nodes at the same time, you can actually put new binary on just one special node. And you can also at the hub level divert the traffic so to the same replica. So to the different replica of the same shard, we send the requests, and we can even compare the responses that it's the same between the node with the new binary and the old one. And once we have trial the new binary for long enough, we can pretty much roll it out one by one. And if we experience any problems, we can also roll it back. And once it's fine, we can just roll to the whole cluster. So much about failure tolerance. Now, the last part that gets a bit complicated is how do we ensure the consistency? And especially with the systems of the high parallelism, the critical question is, okay, there might be algorithms that ensure the consistency of the parts of the system, but how do we make sure that it scales and we get reasonable performance when we have a high degree of parallelism in the system? So, just to model a very simple account transfer, which is in many cases a very simplistic operation. How it's mapped to the database is you usually read, if you have to transfer some money between account A and account B, you have to read and you model it in the data as account balances. You calculate the balance of A, the balance of B, then do the computation and write them back. For NoSQL or distributed databases, this has actually been quite a hard problem, because your accounts, and in this case documents, might be placed on different computational nodes. So there's a whole set of questions. The shards are also replicated. So what happens if, for example, one of the updates to a particular replica have failed? Obviously, because you want to have failure tolerance and you want to keep going, even though if you lost single replica or single shard, you cannot just stop at this point. You have to move on. Which means now, if there is a different hub talking to the same shard, this thing gets inconsistent with that one. So how do you solve this problem? And even without the failures, there is a still question. As you can see, we need to update all of these accounts. So basically, does this happen at the same time? Probably not. And then is there another transaction accessing all of these documents? Is it consistent? So this is a hard problem that we actually sit down at cluster point and we sort of the following solution. So we can enclose and that's pretty standard approach, right? We can enclose the transaction, and we can enclose operations in a transaction. So for each transaction, we generate a unique transaction ID. The documents, on the other hand, can be marked with the transaction IDs, whereby they have been added to the database, and the transaction ID, they have been removed from the database. And what it gives us is, if the computational node knows the transaction IDs that have been committed, it can actually figure out which documents to show up in the result set. So in this case, for example, if these transaction IDs have been committed, then the document 1 and 2 would show up, and the third one, they wouldn't see it because presumably it's a transaction that's not committed yet. And another thing what it gives us is that if all nodes participating in answering a request would know the same set of transaction IDs which were committed, then obviously they would have a consistent picture. So the only problem here is that it is impractical to send all the transaction IDs that were ever committed to every single node. So what we need to do is we need to create another collection that just stores all the transaction IDs and version that collection in a way that we sequence all the transaction IDs and there is a single number. Actually, instead of single number, it can be a vector because we want to shard and replicate the transaction ID as well. The important part is that there is a number or vector of numbers which defines the state of the cluster. So instead of propagating the whole transaction ID, the hub can just say to the nodes, my view of the world is transaction log is at the position 3, and nodes can apply this knowledge. So basically, another thing we need to do for that is that instead of every transaction ID, now in the primary storage for the committed transactions, we actually need to mark not the transaction ID, but the version of the transaction log that has been, with which this transaction ID has been committed. So the way it works end to end is, let's say we want to create a new transaction. and we give it a transaction ID, and inside that transaction we add a new document. So in the first place we put in the document and we mark what transaction ID was it added with. Then we can do that for every document that is added, updated, or deleted within the transaction. And at the end we want to commit the transaction, which means that we write the transaction to the transaction log, we obtain the version of the transaction log, and we notify the nodes that participated in the transaction what the transaction log version of the particular ID was. So we can update that structure, which will be used afterwards to make it consistent among the nodes. So, yeah, the fundamental question is only, does this scale? Can we do more transactions by adding new servers? And to answer that question, let's first look at how the distributed databases scale in the first place. So for the key value operations, by those I mean creation of the document, reading one document by its key, or updating, deleting the document, you have to contact every replica of a particular shard. So the cost of operation, if you express it as a function of the number of machines or number of the shards in the system, is constant, because you are talking just a fixed number of replicas. If that cost is constant in terms of number of servers, then by adding more servers, you get more and more and more operations. Okay, then the more tricky case is the wide range queries. If we want to pick a subset out of the document, out of the database, subset of documents that match a particular query, there are a couple of cases, and it's not really straightforward. So in this case, the cost of the operation is proportional to n, which is basically the number of shards or number of computational nodes. And so basically there's given amount of work done on that on each of computational nodes, and then you multiply it by the amount of work done on a particular node, which is, there must be some constant, because as soon as you are entering a particular computational node, there is at least some amount of CPU consumed to at least answer the request. Plus, there is some amount of work that might be variable based on the number of servers. And that might be, for example, if your operation is proportional, or the cost of the operation is proportional to the number of documents in the database, then that part actually shrinks with adding more servers. Like if you were to use certain amount of CPU for each document, then basically by having more servers in the system, you would be able to do more such operations. So the question is also only about the proportions between C and B. In this case, if the part that is not proportional to n is sufficiently small, then up to some degree of n, the system can scale. And looking at some particular examples, let's say that the operation which is give me all documents, or give me the documents with the highest value of some field A, this is clearly the case where it doesn't scale linearly, because by adding more servers, each of the servers would actually do exactly the same amount of work. So by adding of more servers, you get nothing, right? Because each of the servers would look at the index, read the top, whatever, how many documents you ask. Let's say you ask for 10 documents. Each of the nodes will get the 10 documents, pass it back to the hub. They will find the top documents and propagate it back. So this one wouldn't scale. Then again, if you do something more elaborate, which is basically if you have some non-trivial aggregation where you have to go through every document and let's say group by a certain value and calculate some sort of aggregation like a sum, there is amount of work that is proportional to every document in the database. So in this case, this would be the other case where actually you gain more by adding more servers because each server proportionally does less until you scale out so widely that the cost done at each server is actually becomes proportional to the fixed cost, and then it doesn't scale anymore. And the full text search is actually an interesting one because in a sense it gets more costly with the number of documents, but there are certain tricks, like for example if you order by relevance, then you can play certain tricks and not exhaust the entire posting list, so you can get the results quicker. So it falls somewhere in the middle. So returning back to transactions, so you can see what are the costs or what are the operations done in the transaction, and all the way until the commit. Basically, we contacted, if we had to read and write two documents, and A and B, then we contacted those particular nodes. Then upon commit operation, we actually had to write the transaction ID to the transaction log, and then again we contacted the two nodes by informing them that this transaction ID maps to the particular transaction log version. So basically the number of operations done is constant in terms of number of nodes, so it would scale pretty well by adding more and more servers. So there is a caveat, however, and that caveat is, now let's say there is another transaction running, which actually now reads document B and document C. The question is, if you have run through the previous transaction, which updates document A and B, and creates a new version of the transaction log shard1, and this transaction informed shard2 about the existence of the transaction log, this new transaction accessing document C on shard3 or node hosting shard3 obviously doesn't know anything about the new version of the transaction log. So the hub kind of doesn't know, am I in consistent state or am I not? And there are two ways or some techniques how to resolve this case. So one of them could be periodical propagation. So whenever we have added a lot of new entries to the transaction log, or actually proportional to the number of shards, we could just propagate all of that to every shard. So they all get into a consistent state. And the good thing about that, if we make these lengths, which we weight proportional to n, then the overhead again for the one transaction is constant, because we have basically smeared it out between the transactions. So from that point of view, this would actually, periodic propagation would scale. However, the problem is it introduces latency in the system because it takes some time, which is proportional to number of shards in which system gets into consistent state. So moving to the next slide. slide, again returning to the example with another transaction that is reading C, when it had read document C and observed that it doesn't know, that the shard3 doesn't know about the new version of transaction log, it has two options. Either to wait until this transaction log version gets propagated, or it can actually trigger the propagation for this particular shard. So there is a trade-off in the system, either to accept extra latency or to accept extra cost for the read operation when we stumble on the document that is newer than known to the shards. We might trigger additional operations. So that's pretty much it about the consistency. And yeah, basically this is in a very short period, a sketch about how we manage consistency with the cluster. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope that. I hope I have given a few examples how basically a software stack can transform a single computer in a cluster of computers that can work in a coordinated way. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Sigmars. We're going to give away this Oculus, hang on, very shortly. If anyone has not had a chance to enter, please go to the URL up top here. If you need help with that, there's a few people walking around who can help you. We're going to give that away right after our Q&A. So before we start the Q&A, I just want to point out, good Q&A questions will get free t-shirts. Yay! All right. Yay! So let's just start with the first question. Yes?
Okay. In your Monte Carlo simulation, how do you adjust to seasonality? This is the first question. The second question, how do you adjust the user that I call super user? Those users create a query that result with a large set of result set. And I'm sure that you're familiar with what I'm talking about super users. Some users are really unpredictable in their queries. So seasonality, for example, in your you have clients that in December would like to exercise more, so you see a spike, big spike, because it's December after the Christmas party, everybody would like to exercise a little bit more to lose some weight.
Yeah, right. So basically, the question is about the
Monte Carlo. How do you Monte Carlo, which is I assume that you use just Gaussian distribution.
right.
You need to adjust for the fat tail, either the upside or the downside.
Yeah, so basically, it puts together two kinds of events. One is so basically we have for every user, and this could be seen in the pattern. So basically, you have users that are whose traffic is more, I would say, variable than the others, because we have seen the previous pattern of the workload, right? And then there are users, we haven't seen such a behavior before, and then it can happen suddenly. I think that's what you are referring to, right? So the second case is actually what we call a case of, unpredicted behavior, but in a way, the way how system handles this is that if you put together requirements from 100 or more users, then you have enough cumulative safety buffer in the system. And also you are simulating two events, which is basically machine failures, including the whole rack failures, as well as unpredicted resource demands. So in a way, you are actually, system can tolerate sometimes the whole machines being taken over. But on the other hand, not all of these cases will be caught. So what we want to do, and that's why I talked about these application level queues and requests, we actually, when we make a misprediction in terms of somebody comes with a really expensive request that runs for a lot of time and consumes more resources than there are available, this is the user which will get penalized. So we want to avoid this noisy neighbor or cat on a trampoline problem when there is a single request that we haven't predicted.
So do you apply a throttling mechanism on certain
Yes.
user?
Yes.
Except like Verizon, they promise you 3 gigabytes unlimited data, but after consumption of whatever data they start throttling.
Well, sure. In certain scenarios, you need to throttle. If there are available resources in a cluster, we give it out. If there is no available resources, the first priority is not hurting the users which didn't cause the misprediction. You rather would like to delay the user which made you mispredict.
Okay, let's take the next question.
What's the probability of total failure?
Probability of total failure of a cluster?
Yeah. If you have a cluster cloud of servers of all of them simultaneously.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, there is a certain SLA that the service provides, right? In our case, for example, for production users, it's 3.5 nines, and there's many factors that contribute to that. For example, for a particular cluster, or cannot run better, or cannot have higher availability than, for example, electricity supply to the cluster. So you are using underlying some infrastructure, and you kind of build on top of that.
Okay, next question. Yes.
Is there a way to run multiple applications together?
Yes. So we wanted to always keep this as a feature or duality that basically, even though we focus on database as a service since recently, and we actually believe that that's more economical or cost-effective way of running, we still want to keep an option of running on premises and installing your private cloud or whatever you call it, because there might be cases where users actually need that. Either there is nothing in the region running, or there are policies which require them to run data on their own infrastructure.
Next question. Yeah.
Quick question. What about using a distributed log in front of the database itself, like Apache Kafka? So what essentially that does for you is takes out the entire question about the hits coming in. So your biggest problem then becomes taking in the input from the distributed log, and Kafka is pretty bulletproof. And distributed logs are the basis of pretty much every system. So if we were to take your database, put this log, the distributed log in front, and it might take about 10 milliseconds more, because what we could do is we could have the application call the log first, and if we don't have an answer in the log because the database has already picked it up, then we could just call the database and get the response. So why not go with that system? I mean, a lot of open source databases have this problem with distribution. And I'm just thinking, we all use a distributed log at the back end. Why not just put it in the front end?
So by distributed log, you mean basically an append only kind of store?
You can call the log anytime.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I will be online able to follow the whole design. So for example, the transaction log is that we have for consistency is sort of a log. Putting the log in front, I'm not sure I understand exactly the implications, but feel free to come up after the talk. I think that, I'm happy to discuss this.
Next question. Yes.
On your website, you give away up to 10 gigabytes of that data for free, right? Data storage. Is it correct? So,
Correct.
I was trying to register for that and I couldn't register. So my question is, for how long this storage will be free and how reliable the database is?
So for how long this storage will be free? So for now, we don't have plans to close down this program. This is maybe more question for our marketing people, but yeah, for now we plan to run like this. And the second question was about.
The second question was about reliability because I could not have registered.
Okay, you could not register.
Yes.
This means that you probably didn't receive the email.
No, I didn't. It says failed to register, try later. That's it.
Okay. Well, yeah, I can come up after the talk. Sometimes the email gets. So we want to verify the email accounts as commonly with the registration, and sometimes they get lost. Some people's mail servers filter or send emails. That happens, but a lot of people are able to register. So, yeah.
Any next question? Time for just a couple more.
The questions are, number one, is your shard replication synchronous or asynchronous? And are you using any open source technology or either cluster management?
So is shard replication synchronous or asynchronous? Shard replication is synchronous. So we try to replicate to all the shards which are up. If we discover that some of the shards are down, we keep going, at least in the transactional environment, we keep going as long as we have updated majority.
So if I have a write followed by a read right after that, and the read goes to a different replica, I will see the replica. It's not eventual consistency, it's always consistent.
Yes. Well, actually, we allow both modes. So all of the operations which are wrapped within the transaction will be immediately consistent. All operations going without transaction have immediate consistency.
Next question? Yes.
He said we need to make consistency, like at Google. If he and I do the same search and we get different results because a shard came down, okay.
Yeah, well, you know, your results
It's not
are.
really a joke, but there are some cases where actually you don't need consistency.
Sure, there are cases where you don't need consistency. However, there was like, I think that the short story of the when I joined ClusterPoint, it was like, the big question is why people are not using NoSQL technology everywhere. Why people are still using SQL and relational databases. And I think there are like two big questions. One of them is transactions and another one is joins, right? So we started tackling this is transactional consistency.
All right, we have time for just one more question. Hands? Yes.
What is the maximum size of your database that it can hold?
What is the maximum size of the database we can hold? Well, it's basically a function of the number of servers we have in the footprint, which is basically it depends. So we have bigger footprint right now in Europe than we have in US, but right now we are actually targeting more like keeping many or dealing with many customers with databases of terabyte scale, and we will deal with petabytes easily as well. But you know, that's how far we have rolled with the deployment.
All right, that's all the time we have for direct questions. Quincy Mars will be here for one-on-one questions. First, I would like to say, who wants a T-shirt? We're just going to give them all away. Maybe ones?
Small?
No, they're all one size. All right, next we're gonna give away the Oculus, but before we do, I want to give a great big round of applause to Sigma. Raskin? Thank you all for coming.